This is the next part of my series of tutorials about making locomotive number 5 of the Ballymena and Larne narrow gauge railway, which ran in County Antrim from about the turn of the 19th century through to the close in the 50s, early 50s. And I got as far as making the cylinder in the last session. So now what I want to do is to complete the other bits of modelling that I need to do for this. Basically it means this structure here, and then the piston rod, and also the guide pieces for this crosshead. That is. So I'm going to do that before I then turn it to be at the correct angle. So the first thing I'm going to do, I think there's I can get away with a tube or two tubes there. So what I'll do is I'll use, I'm just using on the cylinder, and again I'm not going to need all those height segments, and in fact I'm not going to need all those faces. I think 12 is going to be sufficient. Always I'm looking to reduce the radius down to just 4 inches. All the time I'm trying to reduce the number of polys that are used by the meshes, so as to keep the file in a reasonable size. And you'll see very quickly when I come to doing the textures for the side of for the livery of the saddle tank and the side of the cab and so forth, that I want to use the, as it were, spend the file size that I have. Just looking at this one I'm talking, the size of the file that I'll be expecting Trainsers to upload, to keep it within reasonable limits, because although there's plenty of people out there with very high spec machines, mine certainly isn't. I mean, it's an i5, but you know, it's not the first flush, as it were. I think about 3 inches on there. There we are. Maybe a bit less. Let's get it positioned. Just pause there because I see there's an extra section there I might be able to lose. Anyway, let's get this positioned. X, Y, Z. So it's buried right inside now, or rather it's poking out over here. So if I'm going to go wireframe, and remember I need to have that texture correction right, so to make sure I've got the right size. Wireframe, and I'm going to bring that over to here, and I'm going to, it appears to be, normally that would be centered. I'm quite surprised that that isn't centered there. That's definitely the way it looks. I was just looking there at the my printout of the size of the my printout of that diagram. So I'm going to raise that up to about there, and also I want to rotate it. I'll have to turn off the, bring it back. There we are. Yes, I think we're okay there. And so I'm going to use that, and then just wondering if it's still a bit too deep. Maybe take it down, the height down to 2.5 inches. And then I'm going to clone it and move it out. I'll move it out in the right direction, and I'll give it a different colour just to identify it, and I'll take the height right down to 1 and increase the radius to 4, which I think will be enough to convey the impression of a fitting, the correct fitting. There we are. Okay, and now the only other thing I need to do, put on texture correct there. The only other thing I need to do now is to make the piston rod so I'm just now going to make the piston rod, this piece here. I'm going to make a rather long rod. I'm just going to clone that up again. And what do we need? A smaller radius. Let's see if a 2-inch diameter and make it a foot long. Just have a look. A different colour. Yeah, I think that'll be okay. Let's make it longer. And the temptation is to go on and keep making other pieces while it's horizontal, because it's easier than making it on the angle once you've turned this to the angle. But I think I'm going to go as far as that, and then what I'll do is just make a note of the angle that I've changed that to and write it on my printed out copy, so that I know what angle to set these pieces to when I come to model them. So let's get these ones done. And there's a number of things that I can do here. First of all, I can convert that to a poly, and I can lose some faces, some polys. Take that one out, and that's one we can lose. And the next piece along, yeah, and next one along, there we are. Now I just convert that to a poly, because there's nothing there I can remove, because I need this face and I need the other face the other side, because it's wider, greater radius than this piece. But the piston itself, I can take out the poly at the inner end, because it's never going to come out of the cylinder. At least I hope not. But if it does, I'll make sure it doesn't. So there we are. Now let's just get these textured, and still sticking with my same old texture frames. Serves a multitude of purposes, and that's why I use it. And I'm going to make that fairly dark, so it's tucked away. And this one I shall make, I'll give it a slightly different look. It's very, very you wouldn't really notice it. And then the piston, what I'm going to do, the piston rod, I'm going to make it shiny, because it's going to be zooming in and out of the cylinder, so surely there's some polishing going on there, and it's going to be shiny, but it's going to be this colour, this grey, shiny. On some of my earlier ones I made it something like that, which I think is too much. So there we are, and that gives us our components for the cylinder. As far as we're going to go with that at the moment, I'm just going to reset that, because we rotated it, and that one, and this one of course, because that got rotated, and make sure to select all three, and make sure that at this stage the pivots are centered, aligned, and aligned to the world. So now I'm going to pick up the whole lot, group it, and this is the element I'm now going to rotate slightly, and I've turned off the rotation constraint to 5 degrees, and I'm going to pick up the whole item, and I'm going to rotate it to get the inclination correct. I think we're just about there. What I can do is, no, it's that one, move it along just to see how we're doing. think maybe just one more bit. Gently push the mouse, don't want to do it too much. I think we're there. I don't want to overdo this. And immediately it shows that this position is wrong, so I shall adjust that. And the way I'll do this is I'll ungroup. Now that leaves some groups there, but this segment here, group that. Now visually I'm just going to drop it down, Z and Y. I'm going to drop it down to where I think it should go. That looks much more like it's centered on the actual cylinder. You can see here how complex it becomes once you start angling it. Maybe go up a fraction just there. I'm going to go into wireframe, and now I'm going to move this section to close up that gap. So I think my instincts basically were correct. It was centered, it was just the angle which was a bit deceiving. It would be very unusual if there wasn't a cylinder centered, and you can see there I've now got that pretty much okay. So I'm prepared to accept that. So the next thing I need to do is select it all and then ungroup. And you might have to give this command several times because it's groups within groups within groups. So now everything there is individual. And you may have guessed what I'm going to do now, which is to reset all of those back to the horizontal and to make sure all of the pivots are correctly aligned. Now that means every item there is now reset to the proper XYZ coordinates as trains will read them. But it also means that every one of these now, when I come to do it, I need to collapse it. You can, let me save this first and see if I can get it to collapse on me. Where are we? There it is. For Gmax to have a hissy fit, what you can do is select all of them, use the select thing, and right click, convert to editable poly, and that will have done the job for you, and amazingly it's worked. Quite often for me that seems to blow its brain, so we'll try and save that. Okay, we're alright, and we're going to select everything there, and I think I've got everything, all those little nuts and everything, and then I'm going to group it. Okay, now let's try and position it on the next part of the design. So let's drop that back. We're actually pretty much in a pretty close position now, because I'm using the side view as the guide. Even though this shows it could perhaps go up a fraction more, I'm quite content with that. I think there's enough of a alignment there to be satisfactory, so I'm going to copy that group, and it's already positioned at minus 2 foot 2.825 inches. So now the clone is going to be over there on the other side. And now let's have a look. Let's bring back what we can bring back, which I suspect is all of those groups there. Yes, there we are. And you can see we've got the piston now is pointing towards our animated bogey. Just to remind you, there it goes. Oh. Right, so what has happened is importing that box has altered the frame length. Let's see if that's going to do the trick. Yeah, it is. So we're only working on 30 frames, we don't need all the hundreds. I've got some models where I've used over 1,000 frames to try and animate things. The Hook 09 Stoneworks uses about 1,200 frames in its animation because it's quite complex. Okay, so now the next thing we want to do is to create this driving rod here. I think that's what it's called. and it looks quite similar, at least at this end, to the connecting rod. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that connecting rod group, which is the connecting rod, I'm going to clone it, and then I'm going to select that, keep the clone selected and hide everything else. So that gives me something to work from, and I'm going to work in here. And the first thing I need to do with this, it's a group, and it's been connected to, even though it's a clone, it's still connected to one of the animations, so I'm going to unlink it. So that should now not be linked to any sort of animation at all. If I, hopefully that'll be fine. And now I'm going to take the group and just position it by eye. It's got to sit over there. So now let's unhide. Let's have a guess that it's group 2. Oh, look at that. First time test. Check. And I also need to, does that include the connecting pin? Yeah, the connecting pin's there as well. Sometimes it doesn't show very well here. But let's go into wireframe. Oops. That was wrong. Left. Zoom in. Shouldn't use the rotate while I'm in those. You can see all the things that can go wrong. So I'm now going to use the move. I think I'm in the right, yeah, there we are. So that's going to position that quite nicely. Now what I want to do is at the far end, it's basically a cylinder. It's rather odd. There's I put this back onto smooth and highlights. There's a pin there, which this section here I would have expected to be more there on the centre of the transom, is it? Maybe that's meant to be an open sort of shape, something like this, but with longer forks. So let's have a look back in wireframe, and for the group what I want to do is I want to affect the pivot, and I'm going to center it over that connecting pin. Okay, so if we click on the group now, there we are, and if I click away from the pivot only, I've now put the center right in the middle of that pin. So this should now rotate upwards. So let's try that, and let's jump back to the middle. There we are. Just do that. Just go up to affect pivot only, so it brings up the pivot, and it will then update itself and swing it over to there. So okay, so let's rotate this until we've got the angle that we want, which I think is there. And now what we'll do is let's have a look. Yeah, so we're looking at that point. So I'm now going to ungroup, and I'm going to start editing individual meshes. Pick up all of the end meshes there. I'm going to make sure I'm X and Y, and I'm in the right thing. I'm going to rotate it and move it, and I'm going to take that back to there, centered, and I'm going to crush those down. I think what I should do first is, rather than doing that, I need to, I've taken it right back, it's now a group. Okay, so I think what I need to do here within this group, group it. So I'm just dealing with this piece here, and what I'm going to do is first of all is with just these vertices highlighted, I need to get this reduction in width. Y only, I think. There we are. And I'm just guessing. But I think it's about there. And come away from that. And I think this I'm going to use and I'm going to reduce that in one direction only. Okay. The vertices, when they're red, that indicates that they've been selected. What I'm doing is I believe that's a slot, the forks going either side. So I'm just now getting it something like it needs to be for when I rotate it. You can probably see there it's beginning to come together. I still think it's a bit wide. I think that's close enough. It'll give me something to work with. I can always move these. I think actually what I need to do is to select these vertices for the lower part and just move them off a bit. Not too much. Yeah, I think that's more accurate. I think I'm going to move those back a bit more. Okay, well we'll try that. Still looks a bit blocky, but not too bad. I've still got some vertices in this cross piece, so there's always a possibility of editing them. So let's pick that up. And have I still got this? No, pick that up and take it into a group. And I'll have to do that business with a pivot again because I've broken the group and now remade it. And I'm going to position that one there. And smooth and highlights, and we should be able to just move the whole thing up. Okay, it was still far too long. I've forgotten to do that. So let's move that back down, and I need to move both of those. So I'm going to break the group again. So I forgot to do what I should have done, and that is to move these vertices over here. And then that's a fucking wireframe, and I need to move this one similarly over. Let's make sure. Anyway, I'm actually looking at it now close up in wireframe. I think what I would like to do is to move these two up a fraction, and I'm going to, as it were, spoof up the look of this by just guessing, moving those out. It just breaks that a little bit, and I think actually move that up to, which was on the Y, move that up to something like that, and maybe move both of them down. Let's try and keep it looking fairly similar. So I'm giving you this exactly as I'm doing it, warts and all. So I'm sorry if these videos do tend to run on a bit, but I feel it's a useful demonstration because it's showing you just how, first of all, how long it does take to make one of these models. So all of you out there who are just saying, oh, you should make this or you should make that, you may begin to get an idea of just how much work goes into making them, and hopefully you'll be a little less strident in some of your demands, or at least seriously think about having a go yourself. So there we are, that's that piece. So now I'm going to ungroup them all yet again, reset Xform and center everything so it's alright, and then I can group it again. Okay, and because it is the same on the other side, what I'm going to do is I'm going to clone this, looking at it here, edit, clone, but it's not bilaterally symmetrical, it's projecting out to the left. So move it over, and now I've got to turn it around twice, I think, if I'm right. I'll try and think out how to do this. So first of all, on the x-axis it needs to rotate, and I'm going to put this constraints back on. Come on, give us the x-axis, I think. It's got to, oops, no, that's the wrong one. The y-axis. It's got to go over 180. Okay, and now what I need to do is bring it down to position it, rotate it to position it over here. So first of all, I'm going to move it over. I'm going to rotate, and this time it's this Y, Z on the Z axis. Turn the constraints off. Let's have a look. Well, that should be at the same height as that, so what I'm going to do is create a crib, which is just a temporary box, and I can now move that side by side, but I want to move it down. No, it's not it. It's going to be Y, it's always the third one. There we are. So that's touching there, so I'm going to move this so that it's touching there, and then I just need to move it so horizontally, so it's about got that centered on there. I can delete the box, my guide, I don't need it anymore. And now of course what I must do, absolutely, is, so that's my other one, which I'm not going to worry about too much at this stage, but I need to ungroup it, I need to reset it, and I need to center everything. It's centered now. Alignment, yeah, it's aligned okay. And I can group it up again. Now the temptation is to use the mirror, this command here. I would avoid that like the plague. I've never had any success with it. It's always caused a problem. There's one use that I have made of it, which is simply to mirror point work when I want to turn from having a I'm just getting this position here, so I'm checking it on this one here, which is 20401. Yeah, is to use the mirror command 401. There we are. And let's save over there. And to do point work when you're doing the individual point rodding, and you want to turn a left turning point into a right turning point, turn out, whatever you want to call them. Okay, so let's get some other stuff back on the screen to have a look at it. Okay, so we can see here that our piston rod is going to be short, I think. Well, in fact it's going to be hidden by that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to hide a whole load of stuff. I'm going to hide all of the other side of the connecting rods and piston rods, and in fact I'll leave that one at the moment. I'll leave this here at the moment, but I'll lose that because it's just going to cause a problem, and we're going to have to be able to see things. So let's just check. Let's have a look at what there's our rotation of the connecting rods. Get it back to 0, and now we've got to make this connect up to the piston. So essentially what we need is to keep this piece in the this motion of this connecting rod, driving rod, whatever it is going to determine the movement of the piston. So I need to keep it centered at that spot. I need to keep it at the same height, because that doesn't go up and down, but it does turn. This pivots around this. You'll see it pivots around this, but we actually use it. This is where we're going to animate it from. It's going to look like it pivots around here. So I need to make a guide, or a couple of guides, and I just use boxes. I use all of this in wireframe for pivoting, and I'll make another box there. Nice and deep. That doesn't matter. The size really doesn't matter. It's just that edge I'm using and this edge here. I'll bring that over to there. Okay. I think I'm right there. Let's have a look. Looks like there's a gap there. Let's go right in and have a look. Nope. Right, so next stage is what are we going to do? We're going to unhide by name. Let's unhide those and select the ones we don't need to. Now although they're hidden, they're still working, because if we were to, just going to hide that one and that one and that one, so I've just left with B&LR Axle 02, which if I thought about it I could probably just select that one, but even though those others aren't visible, they're still controlling the animation of the meshes, just that they're hidden at the moment. So the next thing I need to do is, on the top down view, is to create a dummy to control that connecting rod, and I'm going to position it just here, and let's call it BR Conrod 01. I don't know if it's a connecting rod or not, probably is, and I'm going to center it on the pin there, so it's in there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this group and I'm going to connect it to Conrod 01. So now whatever that dummy does, the connecting rod's going to do. And the next thing I'm going to do is pick up the connecting rod and link it to the axle. So let's have a look and see what effect that has. There we go. So just like with the connecting rod, the driving rod is now flying all over the place, but that's the position we're going to get. Now I'm going to go into animation, and this is where it can become quite sort of, I don't want that window, do I want this one? It can feel rather boring, but believe me, it's worth all the effort. And what you want to do is to make sure you're only ever in animation, that you're only ever animating dummies. If you animate these meshes, it'll not work in trains. I'm going to use rotation. I've made sure that the constraints are off, turn on animation, and I'm going to step through this one frame at a time. 30 frames or 31 frames altogether. So that's the first one. That's frame number 1. So that's no good. So I need to bring this back, and so long as it's in line with the top. Right, that's going the wrong way. I always choose the wrong direction. Okay, so I've just clicked off. That's just one frame. So now I realise that this is going to be too short, so I'm going to take that and just drag them out there, because this is going to move backwards and forwards, but this bit is going to rotate. That's what we want, and I'm in frame 1. Okay, now that's going to be deleted, so I'm not worried about anything that's happened to that. Let's pick up our dummy, go to frame 2. There we are. And I tend to do it using this, unless I get totally bored with the whole process. And if you want to, you can actually zoom in a fair bit. Just make sure you don't click away from the connecting rod of the dummy that's controlling this driving rod. So we get to the next frame, and that's probably the reason why I don't zoom in that much. It just disappears. It's enough to drive you crazy. Let's take that up there. I mean, what you can do is just sort of guess it, and then do it all again, close in, just tidying it up. If you want to do this quickly, frame 5, frame 6, you can see I was above the line there. Frame 7, actually I'm going to leave the box in the other direction. Frame 8. Whoa, I'm doing very well there, aren't I? Frame 9. Okay, I'm just going to click away from the dummy because I need this box to be going in the other direction. I thought it was going to go that way, but of course it's going that way. Frame 9. Finish that. Or at least get it close. Frame 10. Jump up from and 11. I'm doing this in real time. I'm not going to try and speed it up. I'm going to show you exactly what I'm doing, because I think that's the most valuable way of learning, and also you'll see the detail that you need to do to get the effect that you want, and you do want a good effect. So 15 and 16 is halfway through the cycle, so it must start to pull back in a minute. As you can see, it's rotating around the wheel. 18, 19. I'm just doing these roughly. I'm going to go back and do them all a bit more. 21, because I'm going to show you animated. Even just roughly like this, you'll get the idea pretty much straight away. See, it's pulling back at some speed now because it's rotating around to the far side of the wheel. And you can also see how making the wheels and axles first determines how you then animate the motion. So that's always my advice. Build the basic wheel sets, the pair of wheels with the axle first, animate them, and then you build everything else up from that. I go connecting rods, and I make the cylinders, as you can see, and then I make with the piston, but I'm not animating the piston at that stage, and then we are back at 0. Okay, so and then I start adding in all the motion in between. If you're doing something complicated like valve shuts, that's really the only way to do it, because you can then layer upon layer upon layer of animation. So let's have a look at our very rough animation. And it really is rough. You can see it bouncing around there. That's going to be no good, is it? Also a little concerned because I'm thinking about that position. Maybe because the cylinder is going to be, the piston rod is going to be back here. The transom is going to be there. I wonder if I'm doing that right. I know what the problem is. I've got to redo this because I'm not positioning it correctly. What I need to do, it's the angle at which the piston is set. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clone that. It doesn't matter how many of these things you do, as long as you're just left with the right number at the end of the day. And I'm going to go up, and I'm going to ungroup it, and I'm going to delete everything on there. All I want is another piston. I'm going to colour that differently. And I'm going to bring it down and then down along. Think about that. Okay, so what I did in that rough animation was wrong. And in fact, the starting position is wrong. I think. I think it should be that the middle of this should be in line with the middle of this. So what that means is I've got to, the easiest way is to remove the dummy completely, delete it, forget the work that you've done, just bite the bullet, and then position this so that it's the pivot, I'm going to rotate it again from this point. Yes, cylinder. X, Y, Z. Okay. And now what I want to do is to got the pivot set. So I'm going to move this upwards. I don't think it's high enough. Not that much upwards. About there. That's 0.5. I'm going to take it down a little bit. I'm going to put in 0.25. That's about right. Okay, so that's what I now need to animate. So let's turn that off. So I'm going to do the business then of making conrod, BR conrod, BR conrod 01, there it is, and position it again onto here, X, Y, Z, okay, link it to the axle, okay, then this piece which I've moved slightly, I've rotated slightly, I'm going to need to ungroup it, XREF it again, and make sure the pivots are now okay. Otherwise, if you leave it even with a slight angle on it, believe me, it will cause problems. Do it now before you do anything else. Let's save that. Okay, and now I'm going to link the group to conrod 1. Okay, and we just check again. It's all linked up. Yeah, there it is, flying away. But this time what I'm going to do is my guide is now the piston, which is where I should have been in the first place. And basically what I've got to do is try and keep that. This has got to stay parallel with the actual piston, which I'm going to use. And let's move down and wider. What I want to do is to intersect the corner of that. So this then will move up and down here, so it will be parallel. Because that's parallel to that, it will be on the correct alignment with this. Okay, let's try that once more. If there's not enough of this, then I'll just clone this one up again. I'm not attempting to stretch the vertices because they'll not necessarily be right. So let's get that laid on top of that to make sure I've got a guide. That's all this is going to be used for, is a guide for this motion. It's going to come forward quite a way. I think I've got enough length on that now. Okay, so let's try again to animate the driving rod, con rod I'll call it. Okay, right, so animation on, and go to frame 1, and we'll take it up. Frame 2. I know it seems like round the world for a shortcut. Believe me, I've tried to do shortcuts, that is just say animating it on the 5th frame and hoping the frames in between will be correct, and sometimes you can get away with it, but it's always seems to end up taking longer than doing it this way. So this is my advice, is to follow this method, and you'll see that as I'm positioning it, that point there is always over the piston, which means it's going to be lined up fine, because the piston is going to go like that. So you want this to connect up with it, otherwise it'd be daft, wouldn't it? Let's just do these roughly, and then I'm going to zoom in and do them a bit closer, a bit better. Oops. With that. And here we are at number 15 and 16, halfway there. So we're at the fullest extent now of the movement, and it's just beginning to draw. Oops, hit one button. So we're at 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, there we are. And 20, you've got 30 to do. Good job, you didn't set it for 100. Sure, it's got very smart, but also mind-numbingly dull job to do. Now there are certain things like keyframes that you can use. I have tried experimenting with them. I've never been 100% successful. I've used it on a couple of otherwise static scenery models where it seems you can get away with it okay, but for animating the motion of locomotives, I prefer to control every single step, because otherwise it just doesn't look right. You get all sorts of little bumps and wiggles and all the rest of it. So that's just me. Maybe if you can, and then we are back at 0. So let's have a quick look at what we've got. Bouncing about a bit, but it's more or less centered over the piston rod. Okay, so that's good. Let's go back to 0. Now back to 0. Let's animate again. Let's zoom in, making sure we've still got that one selected. Let's save. Let's take a moment. Right, let's zoom in. Now we're going to edit it by controlling down here, and we're going to end up at all the zeros again. So let's go frame 1. Okay, it's gone down minus 1.5, so let's bring it back up. Frame 2. As I'm clicking, I'm watching it up here. It's a bit too much there now. So I'm trying to run it along the edge of my guide. I'm just going to put in a 0.5 in there to bring it back. I think that's okay. Bring it back. So already I'm up to frame 9. Let's take this up 6.5 just to be really, oh no, wrong way. 4.5. Yeah. I mean, you can spend hours doing this. Hours and hours and hours and hours, which is why you must always save your work regularly. Because Gmax will crash out on you if you're not careful. So just halfway through the cycle now. I've not found a quick way of doing this for it to be how I want it, and that all means that's not. I've just got a text message. I'm going to pause there for a moment. So frame 17. Let's have a look. Yeah. Frame 18. Five, 24, 25, a little bit. Number 27, 2, 4, 5, 28, 0.9, 29, and we're really dropping down now, and 30 should be back at 0. So there we are, and 0 and 30 should be the same. So if we look at our animation now, we should have, it won't look very good because of those. I'm going to keep those there as well because I'm going to need them for when I animate the other side. You have to animate each of these sides separately. So let's have a look. That's not bad at all. Let's have a look a bit bigger. What I do is I hide those. just run the animation. And so there we are, we've got the connecting rods animated from before, and now we've got the driving rod, or whatever it is, connecting rod. Also it's rotating around the wheel here, but here it is going left and right and up and down slightly in line with the piston, and the piston rod is always the determining factor here, because it's just going to move in and out of the piston. It can't jiggle about, otherwise that would be a very strange piston indeed. So there we are, that's how far we've got so far. That's where I'm going to end this video. I wanted to include my mistakes as well, because I think you can learn as much from mistakes and how they're corrected as you can from anything else, just demonstrating it. And also to demonstrate that I make plenty of mistakes when I make these, and I've made dozens and dozens of them now, but I continue to make mistakes, and so that's why I was quite keen to illustrate that. So in the next tutorial section of this tutorial, I'm going to show you how this has to be cranked so that it is centered over the piston rod, because it's at one side at the moment, so we have to crank that. But because we've already animated it, we're just going to move it over to the left a little bit at the top end, but I'll come to that. And so that's the end of this video. Please subscribe to my channel. There is no commitment whatsoever. I do not email you, I don't even know who you are. It's just nice to know that I've got subscribers. It encourages me to carry on doing this. Please post comments about anything you don't understand, or you'd like more explanation, or you think I'm making a complete mess of it. And also, if you want to, give me a thumbs up, which would be great. Okay, so on with the design in the next tutorial.